The roar of water was the only warning Delilah Zimmerman had before the wall of brown fury slammed into her, tearing her feet from the creek bed and hurling her into a chaos of mud and debris that swallowed her scream whole. She had been washing clothes at the shallow crossing outside Miles City, Montana, on what had been a perfectly clear July morning in 1876. The sky had shown no hint of the storm raging somewhere in the distant mountains, no warning that death was racing down the canyon in the form of thousands of tons of floodwater. One moment her hands were wringing out her father's work shirt. The next she was tumbling end over end in liquid violence, her lungs burning as she fought to find which way was up. Delilah broke the surface gasping, her soaked dress dragging at her limbs like iron chains. She caught a glimpse of cottonwood trees rushing past, their familiar shapes suddenly alien and terrifying at this speed. The water pulled her under again, and this time when she surfaced, she could hear it. The falls. Whitewater Falls lay 2 miles downstream from the crossing, a 50-foot drop onto jagged rocks that no living thing had ever survived. The sound was still distant, but growing louder with every second. Terror gave her strength she did not know she possessed. She fought to keep her head above water, her arms flailing for anything solid. A branch struck her shoulder hard enough to send stars across her vision, and she grabbed for it desperately, but the rotten wood crumbled in her grip. The current spun her sideways, and she saw the town receding behind her, saw tiny figures running along the bank, their shouts lost in the roar of the flood. Then she went under again, and this time the water seemed determined to keep her. Her lungs screamed for air, her vision dimmed at the edges. She thought of her father, who had already buried her mother and 2 brothers. This would break him entirely. The thought made her fight harder, kicking toward what she hoped was the surface, but her waterlogged skirts were an anchor dragging her down toward the muddy bottom. Something splashed into the water nearby. Through the murk she saw a shape, large and moving with purpose. Strong hands seized her arm, her waist, and suddenly she was being hauled upward with irresistible force. She broke the surface coughing and retching, clutched against something warm and alive. A horse. She was pressed against the neck of a swimming horse, and an arm like an iron band was locked around her middle. "I have got you," a man's voice said close to her ear, rough and strained with effort. "Hold on to the saddle horn. Do not let go." Her fingers found the horn and wrapped around it with desperate strength. The horse was swimming hard, angled across the current rather than fighting it directly. The man behind her urged the animal on with low, encouraging words that somehow cut through her panic. They were not moving toward the bank. They were moving downstream, riding with the flood but gradually, incrementally, working toward the eastern shore. "The falls," she managed to gasp out between coughs. "I know," he said grimly. "We will make it. Star has never failed me yet." The horse's breathing was labored, great huffing breaths that she could feel through her hands on the saddle. The current kept trying to drag them back toward the center of the swollen creek, but the mare fought with a courage that seemed almost human. The man's arm never loosened around Delilah's waist, keeping her pressed against the horse's neck even when debris slammed into them, when the water tried to tear them apart. The roar of the falls was growing louder, much louder. Delilah risked a glance downstream and saw the horizon line where the water simply ended, dropping away into mist and thunder. They were running out of river. The eastern bank was still 30 yards away, maybe more, and the current was accelerating as they approached the falls. "Come on, Star," the man urged, and there was something raw in his voice now, something that might have been fear. "Come on, girl. You can do this." The mare's hooves found bottom for just a second, and she lunged forward with the leverage, gaining precious yards. Then the current lifted them again, spinning them sideways. Delilah could see the edge clearly now, could see individual rocks jutting from the white water at the base of the falls. 20 yards to the bank, 15 to the falls. The horse's hoof struck bottom again, and this time stayed down. Another step, another, the mare lunging through chest-deep water now instead of swimming. 10 yards to safety, 10 yards to the falls. The man was leaning forward over Delilah, shouting encouragement, his voice blending with the roar until she could not tell them apart. 5 yards, 5 yards. The mare lunged up the bank with her last strength, water streaming from her coat. The man swung down in the same motion, pulling Delilah with him, and they collapsed together on solid ground even as the current that would have carried them over the falls roared past mere feet away. Delilah lay on her back in the mud and grass, coughing up creek water and trying to remember how to breathe. The sky above her was still that perfect, cloudless blue, innocent as a child's eyes. Her whole body was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Are you hurt?" The man's face appeared above her, blocking out the sky. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair plastered to his head and gray eyes that held an intensity that made her breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with nearly drowning. "Miss, can you hear me? Are you injured?" "I am alive," she managed. "I am alive because of you." His expression shifted, some of the terrible tension leaving his features. "Thank God. When I saw you go past town, I thought." He shook his head. "I am Xander Pierce. That is Star, and she is the bravest horse in Montana." Delilah pushed herself up on her elbows. The mare stood a few feet away, her head hanging low, sides heaving. "She saved my life. You both did. Can you stand? We should get you back to town, get you warm and dry." Xander offered his hand, and when she took it, she felt the calluses of hard work, the strength that had held her secure in the water. Her legs barely held her weight. She would have fallen if he had not caught her, his arm going around her waist again in an echo of how he had held her on the horse. "I apologize," she said. "I seem to be weaker than I thought. You were just dragged down a flash flood. You are allowed to be weak." There was something in his voice, a gentleness that contrasted with his rough appearance. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, denim and worn leather, a bandana around his neck. His hat was gone, probably lost to the creek. "I am going to have to put you on Star again. Do you think you can manage that?" She nodded, though the idea of getting back on the horse filled her with an irrational fear. But when Xander lifted her into the saddle and climbed up behind her, his solid presence at her back made the fear recede. Star started walking, slow and tired, following the creek bank back upstream toward Miles City. The ride took almost an hour. Star was exhausted, and Xander did not push her. He kept one arm around Delilah's waist, steadying her when she swayed, and she found herself leaning back against his chest without meaning to. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder blade, still racing from their near brush with death. "How did you know?" she asked finally, her voice rough from all the water she had swallowed. "How did you get to me in time?" "I was bringing Star back from the smith when someone shouted that the creek was flooding. I saw you go past, saw you fighting the current. There was not time to think, just time to act." His arm tightened fractionally around her. "I grew up along this creek. I knew if I rode hard enough, I could reach the bend before you did and cut you off. You risked your life for a stranger. I could not stand by and watch you die." He said it simply, as if there had never been any choice at all. They reached the edge of town to find half of Miles City waiting for them. Someone must have ridden ahead with word that they had made it to shore. Delilah's father pushed through the crowd, his weathered face crumpling when he saw her alive. "Delilah! Oh, my girl, my girl!" He pulled her down from the horse and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she did not complain. She held him just as hard, feeling his shoulders shake with silent sobs. "I thought I had lost you. When I saw that water coming, saw you disappear, I thought that was the end." "This man saved me," she said, pulling back enough to gesture at Xander, who had dismounted and was tending to Star. "Papa, this is Xander Pierce. He rode right into the flood and pulled me out." Her father turned to Xander, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then he crossed to the younger man and gripped his hand with both of his own. "You have given me back everything that matters in this world. I am Samuel Zimmerman, and I am in your debt for the rest of my life." Xander looked uncomfortable with the attention, with the crowd gathering around them. "Any man would have done the same, sir. I am just glad I was there." "Any man would not have," Samuel said firmly. "Any man did not." "You did, and I will not forget it." The town doctor pushed through the crowd, a portly man named Henderson who had tended the Zimmerman family for years. "Let me see her, Samuel. Miss Zimmerman, you need to be examined. Flash floods carry all manner of debris and disease." The next hours passed in a blur of medical examination, hot broth, and warm blankets. Dr. Henderson declared her bruised but miraculously unbroken, with no signs of serious injury beyond shock and exhaustion. Her father hovered anxiously while the doctor's wife helped her into dry clothes borrowed from their daughter, who had married and moved to Helena the previous spring. It was only when she was finally settled in the doctor's guest room, clean and warm and alive, that the full weight of what had happened crashed down on her. She started to shake again, and this time she could not stop. The tears came in great racking sobs that seemed to tear up from somewhere deep in her chest. She had come so close, so terribly, impossibly close. There was a soft knock at the door. "Miss Zimmerman." It was Xander's voice, hesitant. "The doctor said you might want to talk to someone who was there. Sometimes that helps with the shock." "Come in," she managed, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. He entered carefully, hat in his hands now. Someone had found him a dry shirt, though it was too small and strained across his shoulders. "I do not mean to intrude. I just wanted to make sure you were managing. What you went through, it is not an easy thing to carry." "How do you know?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Have you nearly drowned before?" "I fell through ice when I was 15, he said quietly. "Went under the frozen surface of a pond, could not find the hole I had fallen through. My brother pulled me out, but for days afterward I would wake up unable to breathe, feeling that cold water closing over my head." He moved closer, sitting carefully in the chair beside her bed. "It gets easier. The fear fades, but it is all right to feel it now." She looked at him properly for the first time since he had pulled her from the water. In the lamplight, she could see details she had missed before. A scar along his jawline. The way his gray eyes held both strength and kindness in equal measure. The gentle way he held himself, as if he was trying not to take up too much space in her room. He was handsome, she realized, in a rough-hewn way that suited the frontier. "I have not properly thanked you," she said, "for my life, for everything. You do not need to thank me, but I do. You are a hero, Xander Pierce, my hero." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than she had intended. He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "I am no hero, just a man who did what needed doing. That is what makes you a hero." She reached out before she could second-guess herself, placing her hand over his. His skin was warm, his fingers strong. "I mean it, thank you." He looked up at her, and something passed between them in that moment, something electric and undeniable. "I am glad you are safe," he said, his voice rough. "When I saw you go under that last time, when I thought I might not reach you in time, I felt—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I have never been so afraid in my life." But you did reach me, you and Star. How is she, the mare, I mean? Dr. Henderson checked her too. He said she is a marvel, should be fine after a few days' rest. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. She will expect extra oats for a month after this, and I cannot say she does not deserve them. Delilah found herself smiling back. I will bring her apples and carrots, whatever a hero horse should eat. They talked for another hour, their hands still touching on the blanket between them. He told her about his small ranch north of town, how he had come to Montana from Kansas 3 years ago looking for a fresh start after his parents died. She told him about losing her mother and brothers to cholera, about helping her father run the general store that was their livelihood. The words came easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of hours. When her father came to check on her, he found them laughing over Xander's description of Star's attempts to intimidate the farrier. Samuel's expression softened when he saw them together. Mr. Pierce, you are welcome at our home anytime. In fact, I insist you come to supper tomorrow evening. It is the least we can do. Xander accepted graciously, and when he left, Delilah found herself already looking forward to seeing him again with an eagerness that surprised her. She had been courted before, by the banker's son and by the new schoolteacher, but neither had made her heart race the way it did when she thought of Xander's gray eyes, his strong hands, the way he had held her so carefully in the doctor's guest room. The next evening, Xander arrived at the Zimmerman home exactly on time, freshly shaved and wearing what were clearly his best clothes. He brought flowers for Delilah, wildflowers he must have picked from the prairie, and a bottle of whiskey for her father. Samuel welcomed him warmly, and over a dinner of roast chicken and potatoes, they talked about everything from the weather to the recent news of Custer's defeat at the Little Bighorn. Terrible business, Samuel said, shaking his head. Reckless, attacking that many warriors with so few men. Those soldiers had families. The Lakota and Cheyenne were defending their families, Xander said quietly. I am not saying Custer's death is not a tragedy, but what brought him to that valley was the same hunger for land that has driven every treaty violation since the first settlers came west. Sometimes I think we forget that this was someone else's home first. Delilah watched her father's reaction carefully. Samuel was a fair man, but many in Miles City had strong feelings about the recent conflicts with the Sioux and Cheyenne tribes, but her father just nodded thoughtfully. You may be right at that. My wife, God rest her, she used to say that greed makes monsters of good men. I think she would have had strong words about how this territory has been won. The conversation moved on, but Delilah found herself even more drawn to Xander after hearing him speak his mind with such honesty. It would have been easy for him to agree with whatever her father said, to play it safe. Instead, he had spoken his truth, knowing it might not be popular. After dinner, Samuel excused himself to work on the store's accounts, leaving them alone in the parlor with the door properly open. Xander sat beside Delilah on the settee, close enough that she could smell the soap he had used, see the small details like the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. I have been thinking about you, he said, then seemed to catch himself. I apologize, that was too forward. No, she said quickly. I have been thinking about you too. I have not been able to stop thinking about you if I am being honest. He turned to face her more fully. Delilah, I know we have only just met. I know this is sudden and probably foolish, but when I thought I might not reach you in time yesterday, when I thought you might die, I realized something. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time on hesitation. I would like to call on you properly if you will allow it. I would like to court you. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. Yes, she said. Yes, I would like that very much. He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his serious face into something bright and wonderful. "I will make you glad of that decision. I promise you." He kept his promise. Over the following weeks, Xander courted her with a dedication that became the talk of Miles City. He came to dinner 3 times a week, helped her father with heavy work at the store, and took Delilah on carefully chaperoned walks along the creek when the water had returned to its normal, peaceful flow. He brought her small gifts, things that showed he listened when she talked. A book of poetry she had mentioned wanting to read, a blue ribbon for her hair that matched her eyes, a sketch he had drawn of Star, surprisingly good, because she had said she wanted to remember the horse who had saved her life. Delilah found herself falling for him with a speed that should have frightened her, but instead felt as natural as breathing. She loved the way he treated everyone with respect, from her father to the Chinese workers who did laundry in town, despite the prejudice they faced. She loved how gentle he was with Star, with all animals really. She loved the way he looked at her, as if she was something precious and wonderful. One evening in late August, he took her to see his ranch for the first time. It was a modest spread, just a small cabin and barn with grazing land for his growing herd of cattle. But he had built it all himself, and the pride in his voice as he showed her around made her chest ache with affection. "It is not much yet," he said, standing with her on the porch as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "But I have plans. I want to expand the herd, build a bigger house. I want to make something that will last, something I can be proud of." "It is wonderful," she said honestly. "You should be proud of what you have already built." He turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Delilah, these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I know it has only been a short time, but I am sure of my feelings. I am in love with you. I think I have been since the moment I pulled you from that water and saw you alive and fighting." "Xander," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I am not asking for an answer yet," he said quickly. "I know you need time. I just needed you to know how I feel, what you mean to me." "You do not need to wait for an answer," she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you too. I have loved you almost from the beginning. How could I not love the man who risked everything to save me? The man who is kind and honest and good." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, his hands gentle on her waist. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home, like finding something she had been searching for without knowing it. When they parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know this is fast. I know people will say we are rushing, but I do not care. I want you to be my wife. I want to build that bigger house for you, fill it with our children, spend every day of my life making you happy." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married in late September in a simple ceremony at the Miles City church. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her. Xander wore a new suit that he had ordered specially from Chicago, black and formal but clearly uncomfortable to him. He kept tugging at the collar until Delilah reached up and stilled his hand with hers. "You look handsome," she whispered. "You look like an angel," he whispered back, and the reverence in his voice made her blush. Her father gave her away with tears in his eyes, but they were happy tears. He had come to love Xander like a son over the past months, and he told Delilah privately that he could not imagine a better man for her. The whole town turned out for the wedding, people who had watched her grow up, and who remembered the dramatic rescue that had brought her and Xander together. The reception was held at the largest saloon in town, which had been temporarily converted into a dance hall for the occasion. There was music and dancing and more food than Delilah had seen since before her mother died. She danced with her new husband, with her father, with half the men in town. But it was Xander she kept coming back to. Xander whose eyes followed her around the room. Xander who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. When they finally escaped to the ranch, to the cabin that was now their home, Delilah felt a flutter of nervousness. Xander must have sensed it because he took her hands in his and kissed them gently. "We have all the time in the world," he said. "There is no rush, no pressure. Tonight and every night, all I want is for you to feel safe and loved." He kept that promise too, treating her with such tenderness that her nervousness melted away into joy. They lay together afterward in the darkness, her head on his chest, his arms around her, and she thought that she had never been so happy in her entire life. The fall and winter passed in a blur of contentment. Delilah took to ranch life with an ease that surprised them both. She learned to help with the cattle, to manage the chickens they had acquired, to cook on the temperamental stove in their cabin. Xander taught her to ride properly, and though she felt a moment of fear the first time she approached a horse after the flood, his patient encouragement helped her through it. They worked hard during the day and fell into bed exhausted each night, but always with time for gentle words, soft touches, the intimacy that grew deeper with each passing week. Delilah marveled at how natural it felt to be married to him, how completely he had become part of her life. In late December, she realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when January passed with still no sign, she could no longer deny what was happening. She was carrying Xander's child. She told him on a snowy evening when they were sitting by the fire, his arms around her as they watched the flames dance. "Xander, I have news. I am with child." He went completely still for a moment. Then he turned her in his arms to face him, his expression stunned. "Truly, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be. The baby should come in late summer if my counting is right." He let out a whoop of joy that startled her into laughter, then picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "We are having a baby. Delilah, we are going to be parents." His joy was infectious, washing away any lingering fears she had harbored. He set her down gently, then immediately looked worried. "Did I hurt you? Should I not have picked you up like that?" "I am fine," she assured him, touched by his concern. "I am not fragile, Xander." Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But he was protective anyway, insisting on taking over the heavier chores, trying to make her rest more, though she felt perfectly capable of continuing her normal work. It was sweet in a way that made her love him even more. This big, strong cowboy who had saved her life now treating her like she was made of glass. The pregnancy progressed normally through the winter and into spring. Her father was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, already planning how he would teach his grandchild to read and to manage the store's ledgers. Xander built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk, carving small stars into the headboard. "Like Star the horse," he explained, running his fingers over the carving. "So our child always remembers that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is fight against the current." Delilah went into labor on a hot August evening, almost exactly a year after Xander had first told her he loved her. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. Dr. Henderson attended her, along with 2 experienced midwives from town. Xander paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, refusing to leave the cabin despite the tradition that men should make themselves scarce during childbirth. When the baby finally came, a healthy boy with strong lungs and his father's dark hair, the midwife brought him out to show Xander. The look on her husband's face when he saw his son for the first time was something Delilah wished she could have captured in a photograph. Pure wonder, pure love, pure joy. "Can I see her?" he asked the midwife. "Is Delilah all right? She is tired but well. Come and meet your family." He came into the room almost timidly, as if afraid he might break something. Delilah was propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, the baby in her arms. "Come and meet your son," she said. Xander sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face. "He is perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He is absolutely perfect, just like his mother." "We should name him Thomas," Delilah said, "after your father." Xander's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? I thought you wanted to name a son after your brother." "We will have other sons," she said with more confidence than she felt. "This one should be Thomas Pierce, so your father's name lives on." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, careful not to jostle the baby between them. "I love you," he said. "I love you both so much I cannot find words for it." "I love you too," she said. "My hero, my husband, the father of my children." Thomas grew into a bright, active child who kept them both running. Delilah recovered from the birth and returned to helping with the ranch, now with a baby strapped to her back as she worked. Xander was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about horses and cattle even though Thomas was too young to understand. When Thomas was 2, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1879, she gave birth to a daughter they named Dorothy, after Delilah's mother. Xander was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, this big, rough cowboy reduced to complete mush by a tiny girl with her mother's blue eyes. The ranch prospered along with their family. Xander's herd grew, and he hired 2 hands to help with the work. He built the bigger house he had promised, a proper farmhouse with separate bedrooms for the children and a wide porch where they could sit on summer evenings and watch the sunset. Delilah's father remained a constant presence in their lives, coming for dinner at least once a week, spoiling his grandchildren shamelessly. He had sold the general store and now spent his days helping at the ranch or playing with Thomas and Dorothy. He told Delilah once that seeing her so happy had given him a reason to keep going after losing his wife and sons. "You and Xander, those babies, this is what your mother would have wanted," he said, bouncing Dorothy on his knee while Thomas played with toy horses at his feet. "She always said love was the only thing worth having in this life. You two have found it, real and true." On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xander took Delilah back to the spot where he had pulled her from the flood. The creek was peaceful now, flowing gently between its banks, giving no hint of the violence it had contained that day. They stood on the bank hand in hand, watching the water. "You ever think about it?" he asked. "About how different everything would be if I had not reached you in time?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I stop myself because I cannot bear to imagine a world where I do not have this life with you, with our children. What happened that day was terrible and terrifying, but it brought us together. I cannot regret that." "I think about it all the time," he said quietly. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you, how different my life would be without you in it." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You are everything to me, Delilah, you and the children. Everything good in my life started the day I pulled you from this water. Everything good in my life started when a cowboy was brave enough to ride into a flood for a stranger," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "When a good man decided one life was worth risking his own for." He kissed her there beside the creek, the same creek that had nearly killed her and had instead given her everything she had ever wanted. When they parted, both smiling, he pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden carving, a horse that looked like Star. "For you," he said. "So you never forget." "I could never forget," she said, closing her fingers around the carving. "This is part of our story, part of what made us. I will treasure it always." They walked back to the ranch together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. In the distance, they could see their home, see smoke rising from the chimney where her father was no doubt making dinner with the children's dubious help. It was a good life, a happy life, built on the foundation of a single moment of courage and the love that had grown from it. That night, after the children were asleep and her father had gone home, Delilah and Xander lay in their bed talking about the future. They wanted more children, they decided. They wanted to expand the ranch further, maybe buy the property to the east that was going up for sale. They wanted to watch Thomas and Dorothy grow up, wanted to see grandchildren of their own someday. "You ever wish you had married someone else?" Xander asked suddenly. "Someone who could have given you an easier life, a fancier house?" "Never," she said firmly. "Not once, not ever." "You are everything I want, Xander Pierce. You always have been." He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I am the luckiest man alive," he murmured. "To have you, to have this family. I would ride into 1,000 floods if it meant ending up here with you." "No more floods," she said, mock stern. "I have had quite enough of those for one lifetime." He laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest where her head rested. "All right, no more floods. Just this then. Just us and the life we are building together." "Just us," she agreed, and kissed him to seal the promise. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of work and joy. Thomas grew tall and serious like his father, taking to ranch work with a natural aptitude that made Xander proud. Dorothy was spirited and clever, with her mother's quick mind and her father's determination. 2 more children joined the family. Another boy they named Samuel after Delilah's father, and finally another girl, Catherine, who arrived when Delilah was 32 and had thought she was done having babies. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, known for the quality of Xander's cattle and his fair treatment of his workers. He never forgot his own humble beginnings and made sure to pay his hands well, to treat them with respect regardless of their backgrounds. It earned him a reputation as a good man to work for, and he never lacked for help when he needed it. Delilah's father lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren grown, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. At his funeral, Xander spoke about how Samuel had welcomed him into the family without hesitation, how he had trusted him with his daughter's happiness. It was a fitting tribute to a good man who had found joy in his later years through his daughter's family. As they grew older, Delilah and Xander made it a tradition to walk down to the creek every year on the anniversary of the flood. They would stand on the bank, holding hands, remembering the day that had changed everything. The children knew the story by heart, how their father had saved their mother's life, how it had been the beginning of their family story. "Tell us again about Star," Dorothy would beg when she was small, and Xander would describe the brave mare who had swum through the flood, who had fought the current with everything she had. Star had lived to the remarkable age of 26, spending her final years in peaceful retirement in the barn, treated like royalty by the entire family. When she finally passed, Xander had buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a marker that read, "Star the Bravest Heart." On their 20th anniversary, surrounded by their children and a house full of friends, Xander stood to make a toast. He was 45 now, his dark hair threaded with gray, his face lined by sun and wind and laughter. But when he looked at Delilah, his eyes held the same intensity they had held when he first told her he loved her. 20 years ago, he said, raising his glass, I met a woman who would become the center of my world. I met her in the worst possible circumstances, in a moment of terror and chaos. But from that moment came everything good in my life. My wife, my children, this home we have built together. So I want to toast not just to Delilah, but to the unexpected ways that life can surprise us, to the moments that seem like endings but are actually beginnings, to love that starts in a flood and lasts a lifetime. Everyone raised their glasses, but Delilah only had eyes for her husband. When he sat back down beside her, she took his hand and squeezed it tight. "I would do it all again," she whispered to him. "Every moment, every fear, if it meant ending up here with you." "So would I," he whispered back. "1,000 times over." As the evening wore on and the party continued around them, they slipped out onto the porch, seeking a moment of quiet together. The Montana sky was ablaze with stars, more stars than seemed possible, scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. They stood together, looking up at them, Xander's arms around Delilah's waist, her back against his chest, fitting together as perfectly as they had from the beginning. "What are you thinking?" he asked after a long, comfortable silence. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," she said, "for everything. For you, for our family, for this life. I nearly died that day in the flood, Xander. I came so close to losing all of this before I ever had it. And you gave it back to me. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything," he corrected gently. "I was just a cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams. You made those dreams real. You made everything real." She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his beloved face. The face she had woken up next to for 20 years, the face she hoped to wake up next to for 20 more. "We saved each other, I think. You pulled me from the water and I pulled you from loneliness. We were both drowning in different ways." He kissed her then, soft and deep, a kiss that held 20 years of love and passion and partnership. When they finally parted, both smiling, they could hear their children laughing inside the house, could see the warm light spilling from the windows onto the porch. "Come on," Delilah said, taking his hand. "Let's go back to our family." "Our family," he repeated, as if savoring the words. "I never get tired of hearing that." They went back inside together, back to the noise and warmth and love of the life they had built. And if Delilah sometimes still had nightmares about the flood, about the roar of water and the terrible pull of the current, she would wake to find Xander's arms around her, his steady heartbeat under her ear, and remember that, from that chaos had come everything beautiful in her world. The ranch continued to thrive as their children grew and eventually started families of their own. Thomas married a schoolteacher from town and built a house on the eastern section of the property, staying close to help run the ranch. Dorothy married a lawyer and moved to Helena, though she visited often with her growing brood of children. Samuel became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university, and young Catherine showed every sign of following in her brother's footsteps with her love of learning and animals. Xander and Delilah became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family grow and spread across Montana and beyond. But through it all, their love remained the constant, the foundation everything else was built on. They still walked to the creek on the anniversary of the flood, though now they moved more slowly, leaning on each other more for support. They still held hands at the dinner table. They still kissed goodnight every evening without fail. On their 40th anniversary, their children threw them a massive celebration. People came from all over the territory, former ranch hands and their families, friends they had made over the decades, neighbors who had watched their love story unfold. The party lasted 2 days, with food and music and story after story about the impact Xander and Delilah had made on people's lives. But the moment Delilah treasured most came late on the second night, when everyone had finally gone home or gone to bed, and she and Xander were alone on their porch once more. He pulled her close and started to dance with her, humming the waltz they had danced to at their wedding 40 years before. "I love you," he said simply, as they swayed together in the moonlight. "I have loved you every day for 40 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "My cowboy, my hero, my forever love." They danced until the moon set and the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. And when they finally went inside to bed, they went together, hand in hand, just as they had faced everything else in their long and beautiful life. Xander Pierce passed away peacefully at the age of 78, with Delilah holding his hand and all their children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "I see her coming," and though they did not know if he meant Delilah or the creek or something else entirely, they chose to believe he was at peace. Delilah lived another 5 years after his death, spending her days surrounded by family, telling stories about the man who had saved her life, and then spent the rest of his making her happy. She passed away in her sleep at 81, in the house Xander had built for her, in the bed they had shared for so many years. They buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the ranch, not far from where Star was buried. The marker they placed read, "Delilah Zimmerman Pierce, beloved wife, mother, and friend, swept away by love." And beside it, Xander's marker, which read, "Xander Pierce, the man who rode Downstream." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to tell their story, the tale of how a flash flood and a brave cowboy and a fearless horse had created a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, and every year on the anniversary of the flood, the family would gather at the creek to remember and to celebrate the unexpected beginning of everything they had. Because sometimes the worst moments lead to the best things. Sometimes disaster brings blessing. And sometimes, when the current threatens to pull you under, all you need is someone brave enough to ride downstream and grab your hand before the falls.